Well, so let's go to Q&A session. I'm going to allow participants to unmute themselves, and we're ahead of schedule. You are ahead of schedule, and that's totally cool. So we can go to discussion now. So again, let me go to here. You can raise your hand in Zoom using Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows. If anybody has questions for Ron about this presentation, about his thoughts on Bob Lazar's story, or about BAE Green Glow, or any of the many things that he's presented. Riccardo, welcome, sir.
G'day, Tim. Thanks for letting me come on the show a bit later on. But Ron, I've got a question for you now. And it's relevant to me with respect to Bob Lazar, because I'll be talking about that next, and I'll be focusing on this particular thing quite a bit. The figure of 7.46 hertz that Bob Lazar stated, and was actually back in 1989, so it was over 30 years ago. Where do you think that came from? And is that relevant to what you were talking about previously?
I have no idea. I mean, it's obviously a microwave frequency, so it does make me think that whatever it was Bob Lazar saw, it's to do with microwaves. So I couldn't tell you. I have no idea. I have worked as an analyst on millimeter wave systems, and I also worked for several years on stealth, but I never actually I'm not hands-on to the microwaves.
It was actually 7.46 hertz. That's not a microwave frequency, is it?
No, I think it was was it 7 points? You're right.
7.46 hertz, yeah.
Hertz, yes. I was thinking of gigahertz. Right, it's hertz, is it? Right, I don't remember that. Right, okay, I didn't know. I should have to look at that myself. Do you want me to quickly look in this book?
Well, look, if that helps you answer the question, yeah.
Well, it won't help me answer the question. It just means I've been mistaken for quite a while, because I was sort of thinking it was 7.6 gigahertz.
No, 7.46.
I can't find it quickly, so I can't answer your question. Right. But you've now put a question into my mind, and I will need to follow it up.
Okay. Well, you might actually be interested in when I get to my piece, because that's actually what I address very closely.
Right. I shall keep looking while you're talking.
I'm done. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. Well, Riccardo, thank you. So before I go to Avi, I had a question for Ron briefly. Ron, in terms of Area 51, and I know probably none of us know the scope. In fact, somebody posted this in chat. None of us know the scope of what may or may not be going on there. I know two pilots who have flown out of Area 51 in the Air Force. Both of them had all the proper classifications and all that for what they did. And both of them, I mean, obviously no one can talk about exactly what goes on, but both of them strongly insinuated that it was experimental aircraft and drones, right? Stuff that you wouldn't blink an eye at, and neither one of them indicated that there was any kind of alien craft or anything like that there. Now, again, who knows? Maybe they're hiding them in the basement, or God only knows. But that's the scope of my knowledge there. You'd mentioned, I think, during the conference, your colleague had kind of suggested something similar.
Yes, exactly the same.
Okay.
Alien aircraft, not extraterrestrial aircraft. Yes.
Sorry, I just sorry about this. I didn't mean to butt in, but I felt it's important. Bob Lazar actually never claimed to work at Area 51. Specifically, it's an area called S4.
Yeah.
So there is an important distinction, because even Bob Lazar mentioned, I believe in video footage that I've seen, that there were no extraterrestrial activities at Area 51. It occurred at S4. Mm-hmm. So it's an important distinction that we need to make clear. Sorry about that, bud.
Yeah. Well, and for my part, again, I know lots of Air Force pilots and several Air Force officers, you know, lots of military folks who believe in UAPs. You know, they all have their own opinions about Lazar. I won't go one way or the other about that, but yeah, as far as Area 51, these gentlemen didn't see anything, I mean, that would surprise anyone. So, but yeah, what you're saying, S4, I've seen that on maps. S4 is geographically located in a different place. And odds are, if you're testing fighter jets, you probably don't have a need to see UFOs, if any exist. So yeah, just my anecdote. I'm not making yay or nay there, but let me go to Avi next, sir.
Yes, hello.
Hi, and can you turn your camera on, Avi?
It's quite late here.
Oh, okay.
So
well,
I'm in bed.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Anyway.
Well, go ahead with your question, sir.
So basically, my question is a few things. I see a few problems basically coming from the thermal thrust that should be initiated by the thermal gradient in your experiment proposal. For example, thermal thrust is a major issue in satellites. Pioneer, for example, has this Pioneer anomaly, if you heard about it. Okay, so you can maybe calculate those kind of things, expectations from Pioneer trajectories. So so this is like the first thing the first problem, for example, would be to isolate the difference between the thermal thrust and the proposal that you have. Second thing, gravitational frequencies are gravitational wavelength are very long. So in order to have a proper interaction between gravitational field, you're probably going to have to use a much more long wavelength than light laser. So for example, light source with extremely long wavelength could work better. So those like my 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And Ron, did you have a response for Avi, or should I go to the next question, sir?
I'd like to thank him, because this is what I want from the experimenters, to give me some ideas. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Avi, thank you, sir. Let me go to John Quinn next. John, welcome back, sir.
Thanks so much. Thank you to APEC and all our organizers, and Tim, and especially our speaker right now. Very, very stimulating talk. And I'm really glad that Avi kind of set this up, going back to the gentleman's 7.46 hertz. So long wavelengths. That 7.46 times the speed of light, so gives the wavelength of a number that's very close to the circumference of the Earth. So this could be a resonance between the Earth's size and the gravitational field around the Earth. And then some other thoughts that occur. You speak of the thermal gravitational kind of alignment, and that's perfectly in accord with entropic theories of gravity as well. That are coming on the horizon. Particularly for me, a big one is entanglement entropic gravity. There's a particularly illuminating derivation kind of the Einstein field equation from that viewpoint, that in an attempt to unify the quantum and general relativity theories of the universe. And so along that line of unification, there's a great book, to your point of analogies, on quantum classical analogues. I believe it's by someone called Dragoman. And there have been some successful experiments that have been done in that field. So Lagrange-like points have been found in the quantum electrodynamic field. And this gets right back to the main topic, gravitomagnetism. The duality between the electric and magnetic field has a beautiful mathematical relationship I'm sure you're aware of harmonic conjugacy. So it could be that what's needed here is a complex analysis, but perhaps on an octonian or just kind of higher dimensional complex number, to speak loosely. There's some interesting results in this regard from people like Cole Fury and her references back in the 70s. I don't see too much though on there's some pretty big problems people say, kind of the big gravity people. We might be able to keep it real and complex rather than going to any larger fields. I don't know what your guys' thoughts might be on that type of stuff. It's intriguing though. As far as I've looked into it, Cole Fury's theory, I think a lot of people have dropped that name in here, looks very intriguing. So sorry, just a couple thoughts that occur. But I really want to thank you and congratulations. It looks like a great book. I got to get a hold of that as soon as I can. And I think there was a Professor Ronald Evans here at UCSD. Is that in San Diego, where I'm located now? Is that that's probably a coincidence?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that I think that's a coincidence, John. Because yeah, Ron he's out in what, you're in London, right? Near
Not
London.
now, near London, yes.
Okay.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
In the UK.
Apparently, we're all within 7.46th of a light second.
Very good.
Yeah, if I could ask, and this would be the audience to ask, didn't Tesla have a quote unquote magic resonance frequency that was right around 8 hertz? Wasn't that a Tesla thing? I remember reading something about that.
Yeah, I think you could be right.
Yeah.
You know, there's a big noise hump if you just turn on a like spectrum analyzer right around 7 hertz. I think they do say it has to do with the ground, you know, being the Earth and its size. But it always seemed to me that it should have the resonance kind of link, the wavelength of the Earth's diameter. So I had to check that calculation, but it looks like it's closer to the Earth's circumference, the wavelength implied by the 7.46 or 8 or so, you know, right around there.
Yeah, that range. Yeah, and again, I don't want to jump in too much because I'm supposed to be moderating. I read a book, this was years ago at the library, and it was a book on lightning resonance frequencies, and they were talking about the Earth as a capacitive circuit, right? And they had an entire section that was taken from Tesla's notes. I think the book was written in the 50s or 60s. And I remember that was a quote unquote magic frequency. It was right around 8 hertz, somewhere in that range. So he said that was the Earth's natural harmonic frequency, for what it's worth.
It's kind of funny because, you know, 8 billion people were almost there. 8 hertz, you know, like if you want to, it could be a derivative number at the end, like more people, more energy, it increases, you know, that whole field.
It's 7.8, I believe.
So, okay. Thank you. So let me see. Let me go to Harold next. Harold, sir.
Oh, thank you. Great presentation. I missed part of it because I have problem with my web, but I will review it. But I have a 2-part question that you may answer in one shot. The first part is, I have been reading a lot of papers on gravity, you know, and machine basically and other. But every now and then somebody write a paper that says, no, you know, magnetogravity does not exist, you know, that he was wrong, you know, when he wrote it about when he created that part. The second part is, if you let your imagination run wild a little bit, tell me, what does a gravitomagnetic propulsion system would look like for you? What would it accomplish, you know, how, you know, the mechanism, you know? Can you answer that question, you know, because look like both of them are tied to that, to your answer.
Do you want me to try to answer that, Tim?
Please.
Yeah, go for it, sir.
Gravitomagnetism. How would it look like a propulsion system if it were done, you know?
Well, if you looked at my diagram, I showed you when a mass moves, the model, the analog model tells you there's a gravitomagnetic field inside the mass and outside. Outside, it's tiny.
Yes.
Some astrophysicists tell you that huge stars which rotate, the effect of the jets from their poles is due to gravitomagnetism. I've no idea. However, if we come back to my look at that model, and I told you about the curl of gravity term, which is induced by the changing gravitomagnetic field inside the body. And that leads to inertia, or no inertia if you're in free fall. So to answer your second question, if I could actually artificially change the gravitomagnetic field inside the mass, I would create a gravity field on the mass, and the mass would be pushed or thrust.
Okay, so it will be more like the something opposite to gravity, that in the presence of gravity, it will repel gravity itself. Is that what you're saying from that answer?
What I see is a gravity field being created. I mean, the mass has got a gravity field of its own, but it's small. If you create a large gravity field, which is unidirectional within the mass, it'll be unidirectional because of the circular change of gravitomagnetic field. It acts along the core. So it'll be unidirectional, and it will give that mass a thrust.
Okay.
That's how I see it in my mind.
Yeah, okay. That would look like in the presence of, let's say, in a body with gravity, when you produce a gravitomagnetic field, because it will be pushing against the other gravity, basically, it will create a propulsion system, you know, basically that will run away, overcome the gravity of the body, attracting the body that is producing the gravitomagnetic field. Is that how I summarize your answer? Would that be correct?
I think my answer would work in free space, where there is no very little gravity field.
Oh, okay. All right. So I appreciate it. Thank you. I want to review it in your YouTube and team places because I missed part of your presentation and I regret it. But thank you. It looked like, from what I saw, you did a good job. Excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. Harold, thank you, sir. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes until the top of the hour. And again, if you want to ask questions, it's Option Y on Mac or Alt Y on Windows. So Ron, you are ahead of schedule. We have an hour. What we could do is we could go at the top of the hour, we could go to Riccardo Storti, who was going to be presenter number 2, but he is here early. Or alternatively, if you want to talk more about BA systems and green glow and things like that, we could do that as well. It's up to you, sir.
Well, I mean, green glow started when I was at what was in those days was called British Aerospace. And I joined the aerodynamics office, and I worked there on the propulsion section. And then in 1979, the publicity department where I worked, Walton in Lancashire, near London, about 350 miles north of London, they got a picture from what was called the Yorkshire UFO Society. And it was a black thing that had been seen flying very low over the North York moors. The UFO Society from Yorkshire didn't know what it was. They sent it to British Aerospace and said, "Is this one of yours?" And we said, "No, don't know what it is." We found out the following year it was an F-117 flying over the North York moors. We found out because the chief aerodynamicist was asked to go down to Farnborough which used in those days to be the Ministry of Defense Research for Aerodynamics site. And an American Air Force general, I think it was, gave a presentation on the F-117. When the chief aerodynamicist came back, he said, right, I want someone to get our act together, but we want a proper stealth program to make sure we can know what's going on. And I was tasked with that job. One of the first things I realized, which I hadn't realized before, was in the late 40s and early 50s, the United Kingdom, some of it based on German technology, was one of the leading countries on stealth. All the airplanes, the Vulcans and things like that had all been stealthed. So we'd had a lapse of probably 30 years where we hadn't really, British Aerospace, we hadn't extended it. However, Farnborough had been doing it, they hadn't stopped. So that's really, that. From there I got, because I was working on stealth, another group that was working on future technology thought I knew about microwave systems, and they had a millimeter wave program. The idea was that they could detect Russian tanks, in fact. And so I got moved as a mathematician to go and help them with their analysis. And from there, when that work sort of finished, the boss said to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I rather fancied looking at gravity, because as an anti-stealth measure, it could be, make all the stealth work rubbish. All our stealth effort that we're putting into it, if we just come up with a thing that picks up on mass, we can do it. So he said, all right, go ahead. So that's really, that led on to looking at mass and gravity, and then thinking of, well, how do we understand gravity? And then that led on to the Green Glow program.
Okay. Well, so Ron, we're just about at the top of the hour. It looks like we don't have any more questions. So why don't I do this? Riccardo, would you be open to going?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Lulu.
Hi, two questions actually. One for space and one for humans. For space, could that possibly, if we use that, like the gravitomagnetic, to clean up the space? Like, if gravity, we beam the same gravity to attract junk, things like that, to clean it up. So this is for space. And then for what you were talking about, like in history and, all the different experiments that you guys, led back then, and you don't have the feedback. Are human genetics somehow were experimented on detecting, like ESP, an extrasensory perception? I don't know how exactly how to explain it, but just knowing without, using your five senses. And then when checking, it validates itself. So were there like experiments for humans to detect these objects? Like they just kind of feel that there's an object there. And then, just these kind of questions. And, I know you said some of these things you don't want to talk about because, it could lead to things, but like existing on a different field than what everybody else is existing, because you're raising the frequency, the shift. So if you create these, atomic structures on a higher redshift, higher level, and their existence is always like that, wouldn't that change the knowledge it would relativity theory? Because
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Lulu, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think we have your questions. So Ron, she was asking, I think there were two parts. One of them was, could you use gravitomagnetism to help clean up space junk? That was number one. And then number two was I think she was talking about something similar to remote viewing, detecting these objects without necessarily using radar. That would go to kind of your stealth stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that, sir?
I think it's too early for me to say. On the first part of the question, can you use it to clean up space? I'm intrigued in my own mind what is going to be said about Bob Lazar bending these gravity fields. If it's possible to bend in a microwave guide, I'm always interested in end effects. There's always end effects. Does the field come outside? Is there a tractor beam? If there's a tractor beam, then yes, in the long-term future, we might be able to use it to clean up space. The second part of the question, I don't know. I need to think about it.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. Well, again, why don't we do this then? I think, again, we are at the top of the hour. Ron, I want to thank you so much for your presentation. I think what we should probably do now is go to Mr. Riccardo Storti. But before we do that, I want to put this. Oh, Jeremy has a question. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I just wanted to, before we moved on from that one point about like some of that remote viewing stuff, and I'd want to pay attention, tell people to go and check out that BBC segment that was done on you, Ronald Evans, where you went into that place where they at British Defense, and where they have that hypersensitive, quantum system, right? Where the slightest perturbation. So if you were to create a warp field or a gravity field, this thing would be able to detect that sort of stuff. And I'm wondering if, they've done any experiments with, why don't they take the whole entire barracks out and see if they can mentally try to alter the state of this thing to get it to go one state or the other, and see if they can train, soldiers to affect these quantum fields using mental states. I think that would be a valid experiment.
Talking about that higher different frequency. You're talking about higher different frequency. You're talking about quantum in a quantum field state.
Well, it's the same thing that they did at SRI with Ingo Swann. He was able to affect this hypersensitive magnetometer at like a couple floors beneath, using brainwaves apparently. So I just thought it would be an interesting experiment to try, and worth mentioning that they have this equipment at British Aerospace, and probably they could build such similar systems at laboratories around the world, so
yeah.
But it's a quantum target for training is basically what I'm the idea is.
Well, Ron, did you have any thoughts on Jeremy's suggestion?
The work was done at the Ministry of Defence's Porton Down, which is the research centre. British Aerospace didn't have any input to it. It's just an idea that we had. Just with an ordinary gravitational system, you can detect a battleship at 3 miles. What we wanted to do was detect an airplane with a similar system, and we didn't know how to do it. And they mentioned this quantum gravity gradiometer, which is getting more sensitive year by year.
Yeah, that's super interesting. That research into that, because there's a lot of different applications, not just in that, but I also think for validating some of this remote viewing stuff and some of the claims that I've read before, but never seen. I've never done any or engaged in any personal experiments into that sort of thing. But I think it would be it would certainly be worth the effort, But
wonderful.
To see if there's any connection between this consciousness thing that seems to be a prevailing topic and argument in a lot of these mainstream discussions of the physics behind UFOs and stuff lately. So, but anyways, yeah, excellent talk, and thanks for coming on again.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so now we're starting to get questions. Let me go to Thomas then next, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, and welcome back.
Thanks. I was just going to say basically what Jeremy's talking about, the concentration of a group of people affecting something. That probably a good resource to start from would be to look into the PAIR program at Princeton University, and the people who opened Celeron.com, which they have mined devices, and basically there's no physical connection between the people and the device, yet they're able to concentrate and switch them on and off according to a lot of the data they've gathered. And they've actually gone further showing probably a greater degree of understanding of that phenomenon by applying it to building devices that can detect buildups so that it can predict when someone's going to have a seizure too, which I have a friend who actually had one with him that had very severe seizures due to like, I guess it was a reaction to given so much of a drug that it should have killed him to help him get stop smoking over insurance policies and stuff like that. And it, you know, he had them when he was younger, outgrew them, and then this brought it back, and they were able to basically really lay down a timeline of when all of these seizures were happening, and the ones that he was conscious for matched perfectly. So he's assuming that the ones that it detected and you know, while it was monitoring while he was asleep were also accurate too. So being able to basically, you know, switch flip the script to basically use that device, not just for basically a person to be able to concentrate and control something, but to be able to use it to detect something that's going on in the human brain. It seems like there'd be a wealth of information from those, those university professors that were working on that, and all of their, you know, protege that were also working on that same project, gathering an immense amount of data on that. So, and you know, PAIR is, I guess, acronym is the word for it, like NASA, Princeton Engineering Anomaly Research. So if it makes it easier to find, because I know when you look for PAIR on Google, it throws a million other things at you that have nothing to do with Princeton, even if you include the Princeton University part to it for some weird reason. And I know years ago you used to get exact results back then. So, and you know, maybe compare notes too between that and the documents that were put out for a Stargate project, like the technical remote viewing manual and, you know, stuff like that. If you're going to look down that route, they seem to all come together on that, even though they're all completely different and disparate individuals that have nothing to do with each other. So, you know, just throwing it out there. If anybody needs links, I have the very rare and difficult to find software available on a Google Drive if anyone wants to try to take advantage of it too, where basically you use your mind to control images on a screen, called Shape Changer. So something that the PAIR Institute put together while they were researching this and investigating and whatnot. So
yeah, you know, Thomas, thank you. And if I could interject, I actually did a story on that, and I interviewed Dr. Forgetting his name, I'm spacing out, but one of the principal researchers from the Noetic Society on it, and they did get results with it. That was what he'd indicated. So
well, I'm going to say the other thing to look into is the fact of, since they had this success with this, they were building devices. Look into the, you know, mechanics and the physics of those devices, possibly for, you know, further insight too. Because I mean, most of their successful devices, they were able to control what they were, you know, exhibiting control from the mind, and identical devices sitting right next to each other halfway around the world, able to basically affect one without affecting the other, were mostly built around a device that was detecting the massive amount of thermal energy variance that occurs from Brownian motion, you know, injecting thermal energy into a component. So, you know, there may be an awful lot of like a treasure trove of information that has been kind of dug up with all this research, but now they don't know what to do with it, you know, because they had their mind on one thing, and you may be able to apply that to something else. I mean, I'm finding that with a lot of what I'm doing for developing replicator level, you know, capabilities for 3D printers, is that I find when I get an idea of how to do something and I start doing a little digging online, I find that other people, for another completely different reason, have done an awful lot of research and development, and there's a lot of equipment already available that's just not being used for you know, three-dimensional deposition on a level where you could print out an LED, you know, from raw and scratch on a countertop, stuff like that. So just bringing the pieces together, it might be, we may have all the, in other words, what I'm saying is we may have nearly all of the components you need. You just got to figure out what they're being used for, and, you know, bring them all together, and then you've got a off-the-shelf solution for whatever it is you're trying to build, that once you prove the function, then you can maybe get the, you know, the parts you need more custom tailored to your means of, you know, production too.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so let's bring this back to Ron. Ron, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm just trying to, like you, I can't remember somebody's name. We had somebody from Cambridge, the superconductive switchman. What was his name? Professor?
Brian Josephson.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Well done. While we were there with Greenglow, we had him come and talk to us. And he was very much talking about consciousness. I'm not sure whether he's still alive. Is he? I have no idea.
Yeah,
He's
on Jack Sarfati's list. So
right.
Yeah. So yes, he's quite active.
We never followed up any of his ideas, but it was interesting that he was. I mean, we had lots of interesting people on Greenglow come along and talk to us about different subjects.
Oh, okay. Let me go to Morgan next, who has been patiently waiting. Sir?
Hold on, I just want to inject one real quick last thing.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of misinterpreting and misdirection of information that just I think is it's not intentional. But I see like with the double slit experiment, just as a real quick example, they're assuming that observation is causing the change between the double slit experiment, when in reality, if you look at what they're doing, they were using electromagnetic equipment that puts out an EMF field, meaning there's a vibration that basically forces all of the EM fields within the atoms in the slits to then synchronize instead of being completely randomized. So it's not the observation in that instance necessarily that causes the switch, but rather you altering physical properties of the experiment with the equipment you're using to observe, and kind of filter all of those bad assumptions possibly out as best as possible before moving forward to dig through all the existing information too. So I just wanted to make sure what I had already laid out there as far as digging out that other information didn't end up accidentally bringing a bunch of bad information into it too that people aren't aware of, and therefore it ends up tainting your whoever happens to be trying to do this, their end results. So I can go ahead and mute out and get out so he can talk now.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, thank you. Yeah, and we should probably come back and touch on the double slit thing. Actually, I've read some interesting new models there recently, but yeah, let's go to Morgan first, though. Morgan, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Again. So Ron, I was just thinking about this experiment you were proposing with this laser inside some tube or whatever, with heating on both ends. The first thing that came to mind were these fiber optics, and a lot of times what I've seen it with people use is actually the laser light itself is used as a source of heat. Okay, so you might not need a light source as well as like some sort of heating source, but the laser light itself could be a source of heat as well. And then that right there just alone came to made me think of these experiments from Martin Tajmar on these. He has these fiber optic loops to test essentially a variant of the M drive. I was trying right now to go and look through his webpage to see if I could find the actual publications, but essentially a benchmark test like what you were describing may have been done with these experiments from Tajmar, and I'll see if I can find some links from those. But sound very similar to what he's been doing, and so at least it's an active area of research right now. So I'll see if I can find his links. But yeah, no, it's cool idea though. But yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ron, did you have any thoughts on that or?
No, I talked. Well, I talked. I've not met Roger, but I email him and talk to him on the phone from time to time. I don't know where he's up to at the moment. Hopefully, still successful.
Okay. Well, let me go back to Harold, sir.
Yes, Ron. One more question. I just remember your experiment. I saw part of that you're proposing. But in Gravity Probe B, they collected a lot of data, and they proved that there is a gravitomagnetic force, the force being produced by the star, I think it was Alpha Centauri, and they proved how many arcs per year it would deflect the gyroscope, producing a force. What the data in Gravity Probe B serves also as a way to verify your experiment that you have proposed, so that it will validate your ideas. Would that be some data? Would that be useful to you?
It could be. I mentioned Gravity Probe B in this book that I wrote before, and it talks also about, there were experiments done in New Zealand using the world's biggest ring laser gyro, which was trying to find the gravitomagnetic field of the Earth. It's too small to detect. This is the problem. Outside the body, the field is too small. This is why Gravity Probe B was using the size of the Earth as well. And they were trying to look for an effect across space. And it took them, I don't know how, I think over 18 months to collect the data and manipulate it to get an answer. We're talking about a field which is tiny, but in my view, if we could control it, it makes a big difference.
Oh, okay. That's about an interesting. I hope they find. All right. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Harold. I was actually doing some looking while Harold was asking his question about. So what I found was double slit experiment validating simulation theory, and I couldn't find the paper that I wrote about it, but I did read an interesting one, and it was a different take on the double slit experiment. What they were saying was, if any of you guys are computer guys, you know that they conserve processing in game engines, and one of the ways is by processing things differently that the eye isn't going to see, and so there was a really interesting paper that looked at the double slit experiment, and they said we are living in a simulation, and if you were writing software, this is how you would write it, and this is the double slit experiment kind of validates that. But so again, we can come back to that later. Okay, so who has more questions for Mr. Evans?
I do.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, Ron.
Yes, sir.
Listen, a long time ago, Tesla built a spacecraft, two-man spacecraft, warp drive, with 8 warp cores and a stator that spun around and gave an electromagnetic field. Okay, he did that in 1899. He did it in Colorado Springs at the time, and the little bit later, about 1938, the Nazis took his work and started making Bell crafts on it, anti-gravitational craft, which I think Tesla also built 2 doorways. Well, like 2 doorways. One doorway you can walk in, and the other doorway you come out a half mile down the road. So, I think it's under Einstein's boson, point A to point B. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but I don't understand it. It's beyond me.
Okay.
It's beyond me.
Okay, because when I was at Area 51, when I was running Area 51 back in the day. I asked the head guy, it was James Roberts, who was a colonel. I said, would you show me all Tesla's information and all his experiments? And he took me into Los Alamos in a vault, and he showed me all this stuff. And I thought it was interesting, and he was explaining it to me about all the different experiments he had. He had 700 patents with working patents.
Wow.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you. Okay. So let me see. We're at 1:20 now, Pacific time. Do we have more questions for Ron? Okay. Well, why don't we do this then? We're not at the top of the hour, but why don't we put it on gallery view? And I think Riccardo is still with us. Riccardo, did you want to start your presentation now?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to.
Okay, well, let me do that. So before anything else, let's all give, and again, a giant applause for Ron Evans. Ron, thank you, sir. Thank you again for coming back and presenting on that.
Thank you.